Going on, everybody? Welcome into Week 17 fantasy football starts and sits of the week. We're heading into the championship week, and if you got congratulations, and let's finish the deal and bring home the trophy. First up, we got our quarterback start of the week, and it's going to be none other than Jalen Hurts, quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, coming off of a good game, 301 yards, 2 total touchdowns in the win over the New York Giants. And this week gets another great matchup. The Cardinals ranked 27th overall against the quarterbacks. So he's going to either give you, some rushing touchdowns at the goal line or a couple of touchdowns through the air. This is probably going to be a game that turns sideways for the Cardinals. Look for the Eagles offense to continue to soar. So Jalen Hurts is the start of the week going up against a really good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. Defense has definitely been struggling this whole entire season. Next up, we have our running back start of the week is Kyren Williams. Now, man, Kyren Williams is definitely the pickup of the year. He's been a top 5 RB pretty much every week, it seems like, for the past couple of weeks. Another good matchup here going up against the Giants. The Giants rush defense, 22nd versus the running back. And he's coming off a good performance against the Saints on Thursday night. 22 attempts, 104 yards and a touchdown. Good enough for 17.4 fantasy points. And this man is just a lock to be a top 5 RB pretty much every single week. He's projected 20.8. So Kyren Williams, if you have him in your lineup, plug him into your RB1 and feel confident to put him in that spot against the Giants rush defense. It's also been struggling too, 22nd against the RB. Kyren Williams this week also start Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk, it was a tough game for the 49ers offense, only mustered 13 points, but Ayuk was one of the lone bright spots for this 49ers offense, 6 receptions, 113 yards, good enough for 17.3 fantasy points. This week gets one of the best matchups of the season so far, going up against the Commanders secondary. I feel like that was one of the most position groups that we've gone after in these starts and sits is the Commanders secondary. The Commanders secondary ranks at the bottom. I trust pretty much every pass catcher that the 49ers, you got George Kittle, you got Deebo Samuel, but Brandon Ayuk, he's been Brock Purdy's favorite target. Purdy had a tough game against the Ravens, but I look for him to bounce back and the 49ers to bounce back as a whole as they face off against the Commanders in week number 3. So start Brandon Ayuk this week. So let's go on now to the of the week. Let's start at the quarterback position as we always do here. Tua Tagovailoa is our sit of the week. I know that the Dolphins won against the Cowboys, but Tua didn't really have to do too much. Had the lone touchdown, 293 yards, good enough for 15.52 fantasy points. But a really tough matchup this week against the Baltimore Ravens defense, and you just saw what they did to Brock Purdy. I don't think it's going to be 4 interceptions, don't get me wrong, but the Ravens are a top 3 defense in the NFL. They rank 3rd against defending the quarterback position in fantasy. So I expect that trend to continue. This is going to be a really good matchup here. These are 2 of the top in the AFC. If the Ravens win this one, they pretty much clinch the AFC number 1 seed. But if the Dolphins win, then some chaos could still be ensued. But I'm not really trusting Tua Tagovailoa. Tyreek Hill, he's been dealing with little injuries. He played in last week's game, but it wasn't that Tyreek Hill game that, over 150 yards and a couple of touchdowns. But it was a good enough game for the Dolphins to come out of there with a victory. But I would not start Tua Tagovailoa this week against one of the best defenses in the league. They've been really solid these past couple of weeks in this whole season. Let's go on now to the RB sit of the week. Now, this is tough if you have James Conner, but this is pretty much more dependent on him getting a touchdown for you to really be that start of the week. He's really been consistent for the past couple of weeks. He had 22.2 fantasy points a couple of weeks ago. He had 20 and then 17 past couple of weeks before the bye week. But against the Bears, he only had 45 yards on the ground, so not an effective game on the rushing, but his touchdown came in the receiving department. So that really saved his performance against the Bears and what was a sloppy game out there in Chicago. Not going to get any easier for James Conner as he gets the Philadelphia Eagles. They're a top 5 rushing defense. Their front 7 is very solid. They're going to be tough to stop against James Conner. Like I mentioned earlier, this is probably going to be a game that gets away from the Cardinals, and they're going to have to pass more. So you might see more of Rondale Moore, Marquise Hollywood Brown be in this one. Even James Conner, he could definitely be effective in the passing game too. So he's going to have to. He's going to have to open up that passing game. The Eagles secondary has been a little banged up this past season. So the Eagles have a top 5 defense. So I'm not really relying on James Conner to score you that touchdown that you need to warn him as a start of the week. So if you have other options, definitely do that. If you don't, maybe you just trust with James Conner. But my confidence level is not too high of Conner going up against an Eagles rush defense. Finally, we have our sit of the week, and it's going to be Elijah Moore. Now, there are some storylines in this one. Elijah Moore is going up against his old team, the New York Jets. The Jets secondary has been the absolute toughest matchup in all of fantasy football. They rank number 1 against wide receivers. We saw Amari Cooper absolutely explode last week, over 50 fantasy points. Elijah Moore really has been non-existent in this Browns offense. Only 2 receptions and 19 yards. Joe Flacco, I mean, he's definitely been on point. The Browns on 10 wins. I don't think that many people expected the Cleveland Browns to be at 10 wins at this point, especially with Joe Flacco, the quarterback. But that's just how the NFL operates sometimes. But can't really trust Elijah Moore this season. Coming into it, he was one of my, breakout wide receivers, if you want to call it. It hasn't really come to fruition. But really a tough matchup here. I would definitely still start Amari Cooper just because, the man's coming off of a 50-point performance. But the wide receiver 2 behind him, Elijah Moore, I cannot trust going up against a really tough Jets secondary that's had success this whole entire season. So that is it for the starts and sits heading into Week 17 of Championship Week here in fantasy football.